Welcome to the Putback here on SNY.TV. I'm Ian Begley, SNY's NBA insider, and we're here to break things down, Knicks, and around the NBA for the next half hour or so. Got two great guests with me. I have ESPN's Tim MacMahon, NBA scribe, covered the Mavericks for a long time now as a national writer with ESPN, and the author of the Wonder Boy new book, chronicling Luka Doncic, obviously a very hot topic right now around the league. And we've got also Kaz Famuyide. Obviously, if you're a Knicks fan, you're watching this, you already know who Kaz is, but he is all over 7 p.m. in Brooklyn. Carmelo Anthony's podcast does a great job there. You can catch him on Fanatics, too. You can catch him talking wrestling everywhere if you want.
Oh, yeah.
But right now, we're going to get started with the baseline like we always do. Last night, Knicks falling to Steph Curry and the Warriors seemed to be in the game for most of it. I think it was a 1-point game with about 6.5 minutes to go. Things falling apart there for the Knicks, missing shots, allowing open looks from beyond the arc. Kaz, I want to start with you. Your takeaway from that one.
My biggest takeaway was I think the Warriors defense is the biggest surprise from, the post Jimmy Butler trade era of this team. They're 9-1 since acquiring him. And I think everybody obviously is always going to put a lot of emphasis on the offense. But, like you said, the New York Knicks were very much into that game for the first half of that game. And, it was big and getting Mitchell Robinson back onto the Garden floor. But that second half, that third quarter, Ian, you're in that building a lot of times. That third quarter of doom when everyone's coming back from the Delta Lounge, heading back to their seats. And by the time everyone was back to their seats, it was the Warriors were up, and it looked like a completely different team. I think what Jimmy Butler brings to that team more so than his deep playoff pedigree and obviously his attitude is, he's kind of like a linebacker out there alongside Draymond Green. Just watching him and Draymond call out defensive schemes and getting to open shots. I think OG had a really good offensive game, but when it was time to really put the screws on him and force him to beat them offensively and really lock in on Jalen Brunson and locking on Josh Hart and locking on everybody else, they were extremely impressive. The 3-point defense with the Knicks still continues to be an issue. And when you got Stephen Curry, you got Buddy Hield, Moses Moody hitting. And then, obviously it opens up so many lanes for Jimmy Butler, which in that same third quarter really started to turn on for the Knicks. So the Warriors continue to impress since acquiring Jimmy Butler. And that defense, man, is going to be something to behold when you got guys like with the minds of Butler and Draymond Green back there, just knowing what to do, knowing where to send switches, knowing where to trap. It was really impressive to watch. I couldn't even be mad at the Knicks at that point with that Karl-Anthony Towns in there.
Yeah, the Warriors certainly a tough out right now. And Knicks now going out west, starting with the Lakers and obviously Luka Doncic. But, Tim, I want to start with you with Jalen Brunson. Obviously, you covered him closely in Dallas, and we talked about him a lot on this show for obvious reasons. I'm just wondering, when you were around him back then, second-round pick, having the role that he had, did you see this coming if he were to have this kind of role with the ball in his hands a lot, as he has here in New York?
Listen, Jalen Brunson got better every single season. And by his final season in Dallas, I thought, hey, this guy is a quality NBA star. He was the second best player on the Western Conference Finals team. He was a guy who, when Luka was out for the first few games of the first round against the Jazz, he had 41 and 31 in wins. So it was clear Jalen was a good player. The reaction, obviously, to that contract that he signed with the Knicks, which was about twice as much as the Mavs could have had him for the previous summer, even as late as early January. But the reaction was, oh, wow, that's an overpay. And I remember looking at it and saying, if you look at the numbers, it's about average starting point guard salary. He'll be a good starting point guard. Did I think he'd be All-NBA? Did I think he'd be on MVP ballots? Did I think he would be a really good face of the franchise? No, I didn't think he'd be all those things, but that's what he's become, and it's because he keeps getting better and better and better, and he does have the personality and the kind of demeanor that you want for a guy in that position, especially in that position in a market like New York, where he's got weasels like you just all over him. The cesspool that is New York media, as Rick Carlisle once famously said, a line that I repeat every time those guys come to town. But no, seriously, he's so even keel. He's so cool. And what I didn't see happen was that he would be this level of a scorer on an every night basis. And he's one of the best clutch players in the league too. That doesn't surprise me necessarily because going back to the demeanor. But yeah, he's exceeded everybody's expectations, including his own, including his dad's. I mean, I would assume including Thibodeau's.
Yeah, it's been remarkable, franchise changing. I think pivotal moment for Leon Rose. If it doesn't go well, I think everybody's gone. So yeah, this really can't say enough about it. The Rick Carlisle line, just as a quick aside, talking about the cesspool that is the New York media. I think that was after, I think it was the New York Post. My buddy Mark Berman wrote a story. It might have been early December, late November, talking about Mike Woodson, job on the line, could be fired. Jeff Van Gundy could come in and take over. And it was like, weeks into the season. And Rick obviously was not a fan of that coverage. He let everybody know. Mitchell Robinson.
I let Bondi know every time I see him.
It's great. It's great. When I think about it, I picture Rick just saying it and then like spitting out at like Berman in the group. Obviously that didn't happen, but that would have been awesome if it did. Anyhow, Mitchell Robinson back. Kaz, 3 games in. What do you see? How do you feel about him moving forward?
I mean, obviously, off rip, it's good to have another big body in there. Just off the top, the New York Knicks, obviously, with the top of the Eastern Conference, to go through either the Boston Celtics or the Cleveland Cavaliers, you're gonna have to play big. Those are 2 big teams and big front lines, especially when they're healthy. And we all know the record with the Knicks against the Celtics and the Cavs so far this year. It's been beat to death, but it's with good reason, like especially that Cavaliers game that was played a couple of weeks ago. I've never seen a Knicks team, this iteration of a Knicks team, get so pounded into that paint. Like they did with Evan Mobley and Jared Allen and even Donovan Mitchell getting in there and punching it a few times on some of our big guys. Mitchell Robinson changes that. I think that first game against the Memphis Grizzlies, we saw so many opportunities with, John Morant and Jalen Jackson the third, Jaren Jackson Jr. rather, just at least having that little bit of hesitation going in there just because of Mitch's big body and his length and his activity and his ability to sort of be an amoeba to that defense and, being able to call out rotations from the back line and that D. I think that's so important when it comes to this Knicks team. And it's so important to the way Tom Thibodeau wants to coach his defense. You got to think, as great as an offensive team that this Knicks has been, I don't know Tom Thibodeau as personally as a lot of media members, but I'm sure there's something in the back of the head that kind of itches him that the Knicks defense doesn't have that same sort of reputation that usually carries with Tom Thibodeau. So Mitch at least changes that. I'm still really interested to see how it goes towards the end of the regular season, and do they start to figure Mitch into that starting lineup and see what maybe Josh Hart can give you off the bench? Does Karl-Anthony Towns come and play the 4? I still think there's a lot of things to figure out there, but I think he's already made an impact just from being a 7-foot active body, being able to grab rebounds, get extra possessions, and be a sort of an anchor on that defense that they've been sorely missing throughout this regular season.
Hold on, though. The back of the head for Thibodeau, the defense? No. It is front of mind. Like, you can see it. Those 6 strands that he has that are just hanging on for dear life, that's the miracle of the Knicks season, is those things are still hanging on for dear life when they've had as many defensive issues as they've had. But I think he's got them, like, super glued in there at this point.
Got to, and they never move either. It's always a perfect quaff over his head for sure. But you said it, man. Like that is not a Tom Thibodeau DNA team. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like you got to have that defense, and obviously they have spells where they look really good. Like especially with Miles McBride starting to close out a lot of games, and they have that sort of defensive lineup that they go to for a lot of these clutch games that the Knicks have played really well in, especially led by Jalen Brunson. And, they'll have certain times where Mikal Bridges will come up with a big clutch stop at the end of the games. They have certain times when Miles McBride will come up with a clutch stop on another point guard. He's a deceptively good defender, especially blocking shots at his size. And now you got Mitch back there where, if you need a stop with 5 seconds left, you have a little bit more, you're a little bit more confident that you can close it out, especially when you got Jalen Brunson running that PG offensively, and you can go defensively on the other side. So, yes, front mind, back of mind, side of the mind, Tibbs wants that defense to be back to where it used to be, for sure.
I am curious to see how much Robinson's at the 5 with Cat at the 4. Obviously, Minnesota made the huge move to go get Gobert and make Cat a starting power forward. He still played the 5 in their second unit, but that helped lift them. Eventually, it took some time, but it helped lift them to the Western Conference Finals. The issue with that is Cat at the 5 is a huge reason why the Knicks offense is just taken off into a completely different stratosphere. He's still an outstanding offensive player at the 4, but it's not the same dynamic. It's not the same, just matchup nightmare for the opposing team. And then, if everybody's healthy, say it's whether it's starting lineup, closing lineup, whatever, who's not on the floor? I mean, is Josh Hart coming off the floor? Is Mikal Bridges coming off the floor? Is OG Anunoby? It puts you in a situation where if you want to play big like that and have that traditional big anchor, you're taking one of your best players off the floor.
Tim, you bring up a great point, because when they did trade for Karl Towns, one of the early, assertions was, hey, we could play 5 out. We could spread the floor. We give everybody more room to work. But the Mitchell Robinson lineup obviously takes that space away. I want to get into Karl a little bit here. Before I do, quick aside, I'm not one to comment on another man's hair. I'm fighting a losing battle up top. But I will say, Tibbs, he got the hair. He's got the beard. I think it's a good look. He looks like, an NBA veteran coach out of Central Castings. I gotta disagree with you guys on the quaff of Tibbs, but
we praised it.
What's that?
We praised it. What are you talking about?
Yeah, it's holding on, man. Yeah, it's never a hair out of place. Just because it's not a lot of it doesn't mean it's not looking good. Hey, it's not a hair out of place. No one's looking good.
It's not a quaff. It's a quaff, because clearly he gives no Fs with that.
That's a bar. I like that.
I'm out on the hair commentary, but I appreciate the insight. So Karl Towns missed the game against Golden State, personal reasons. Tom Thibodeau couldn't say before the game whether he'd be with the team in Los Angeles for the game against the Lakers Thursday. If he's not there, he'd probably go Mitchell Robinson again, starting center, and then Precious Achiuwa back up. Seems like Achiuwa's been the odd man out since Robinson's been back, if Towns is in the lineup. So that's something to keep an eye on. Tim, before we get to that Luka deal, you touched on the Cat trade. I'm just wondering, from a 500-foot perspective, your thoughts on that deal and where it sits right now.
Well, honestly, Minnesota has been disappointing this season in large part because the fit with Randall, it's not a smooth fit. And, Randall's a guy who likes to pound the ball, obviously, as does Ant. I think the Timberwolves still have a chance to get things together, but at this point, it's been a much better trade for the Knicks than it has the Wolves. And Cat has done what the Knicks brought him in to do. And again, that is elevate that offense into elite territory. I mean, the Cat Brunson pick and roll, two-man game has been one of the best in the league. There are going to be defensive issues with Cat at the 5. They've obviously experienced that. I think early in the season it was especially rough, but he's never going to be a dominant defensive anchor. But I mean, the guy, it's hard to sit here and complain about Karl-Anthony Towns' performance with the Knicks when he is going to be an all-NBA selection this season. So they've got to figure things out defensively to be a real threat, to make a deep run, to be able to beat the kind of teams that they haven't been able to beat so far this season. But it's been a good move for the Knicks.
Yeah, Towns has done his job, and I think that the defensive stuff, Kaz probably agrees, was always going to be there with Brunson and Cat, but it's about the wings and how they kind of fit in there. But I want to hit on Luka because obviously Knicks playing Lakers Thursday night. Tim, you've been all over this thing. Obviously, the Wonder Boy, your new book out on Luka Doncic. You had to amend it a bit. I'm just wondering about that process, man, with the trade and how has that worked?
Just a bit.
So, it really it put a wild, unexpected plot twist of a bow on the end of the book. The book had because the book was about the pressure on a franchise when you draft a prodigy through the prism of Luka. And so much of his first 6 years, there was all kinds of drama and dysfunction and chaos. I mean, and massive missteps, like the KP trade blew up in their face. They completely bungled the Brunson situation, lost their second best player for nothing after a trip to the Western Conference Finals. They ended up having to tank in the immediate aftermath of the Kyrie trade because things went so haywire. And they were so much concerned about, if we can't build a contender around Luka, is he going to look to leave? And I don't think he would ever have searched for reasons, but there was certainly the threat of those reasons slapping him in the face. So this tension, this pressure, all this stuff is the book. And then there's just the wild plot twist at the end where you successfully built the contender. You went to the finals with him averaging 34, 10, and 9 that season. And before the next trade deadline, you get so sick of his bleep that after kissing his butt for 6 years, you stab him in the back and trade him in the middle of the night. I mean, it's wild stuff. So yeah, I had to hustle to write a final chapter. And it comes out March 25th. There are already 8,000 copies printed. Those folks will have to download the final chapter online. But man, could I have asked for a crazier plot twist and better content? And obviously I've been reporting the thing on the story the whole time. I didn't have to do a lot of extra reporting to write the chapter. I just had to get my mind right and settle in and find the time to write it during a crazy time in the NBA and certainly in my professional life. But again, an insane plot twist. But if you look back, there were breadcrumbs that you could, like the conditioning stuff. There's a lot of that in the book. It's been a story throughout his career. And I get the frustration. I don't get the decision. Again, production to pain in the ass ratio, right? Luka's production is historically high. Mm-hmm. There are bigger pains in the ass than Luka Doncic. I can promise you that. And to trade a generational talent before what should be his prime years, when he is looking forward to signing a long-term extension with you that summer, historically unprecedented and not something that I could have stomached doing.
Tim, I got to ask you a question, man. I know there's been a lot of chatter about something maybe being above Nico's pay grade as far as the Mavericks and this whole casino situation and possibly moving the team. Was there anything about that throughout the book with, maybe that being a reason why they wanted to get away from possibly paying Luka a Supermax extension and trying to do something different?
There's a mention of that conspiracy theory, but that's exactly what it was. This was a Nico Harrison decision where he managed up. He managed up and convinced Patrick Dumont why this was the decision that the Mavericks should make. And hey, Patrick Dumont signed off. And now the other massive development that happened that made this trade possible is Mark Cuban sold the franchise, right? Sold the majority share of the franchise. At the time, Cuban told everybody who would listen, hey, I'm still in charge of basketball operations. I've got control of basketball decisions, forevermore is the way he put it. No, he didn't. And if that doesn't happen, there is a 0.0% that Luka is traded. Mark Cuban's top priority for the previous 6 years was trying to make Luka Doncic happy. All he wanted to do was have Luka be the successor to Dirk, the guy who took the torch from Dirk and spent his entire career in Dallas and, put up awesome numbers and, brought a championship parade to Dallas. It was in Cuban's mind. It wasn't perfect because Dirk's twilight wasn't great, but he through tanking, frankly, through trading up, through some luck, they landed the guy who could take that thing from Dirk and run with it. And once Cuban lost control, they turned around and basically dumped him. Now, there's two criticisms I've gotten when I've talked to a bunch of like people around the league, scouts, executives, etc. One is you just can't trade a guy with that kind of talent at that stage of his career. You just can't do it. Now, there have been people who say, I get wanting to get out of the Luka business because, like obviously the conditioning, blah, blah, blah. Like they can understand that, but what they can't understand is not maximizing the return, which they got Anthony Davis. He's hurt, so we haven't seen him except for 31 minutes. But, dude, the guy's a top 75 all-time player. But for Luka Doncic, Anthony Davis, Max Christie, who's a nice young 3-and-D player, and one first-round pick is pennies on the dollar. And they by keeping it secretive, they didn't maximize the return. And frankly, this fear of the Supermax, which was what Nico Harrison had and what he convinced Patrick Dumont to have, kind of talked him up, managed up and hey, it's a bad investment. First of all, the financial ramifications of this trade are going to be nasty. Like butts and seats are going to be much fewer. TV ratings are going down. Merchandise sales.
Aren't they raising ticket sales too? Then they announced that.
Well, yeah, good. Yeah, and by the way, the PR and that's a continuation of some of the messiest PR that I've probably ever seen in my life, and I've covered the Dallas Cowboys. But the Supermax with a player like Luka, if you think you might want to move him, it is a weapon. It's a weapon. You play out this season, maybe he takes you back to the finals. Supermax him. You got to keep him another year. Well, damn, you're going to have one of the best players in the league on your team for another year. He might not talk to you a whole lot, but he also might average like 35, 12, and 12. Who knows? Maybe go back to the finals. If you still feel at that point next summer like you've got to move on from this guy, like he's, doesn't fit the culture or, the conditions are concerned or where the body's going to break down, he's locked up long term. Call it 4 years because there's probably a player option, whatever. Ask Damian Lillard how much influence a superstar has over his destination if he's locked up with a long-term contract. He wanted to go to MIA. He's in MIL. The letters are similar. The destinations are drastically different. Okay. At that point, you could have put Luka up on the block. Just basically announced to the league, hey, Luka's getting traded before the next training camp. And it would have been an unprecedented bidding war. So I think the decision was premature, and I think the process was extremely flawed. And what you've done, and then the PR has been extraordinarily messy since then. And what they've really done is suck the hope out of a fan base, and not only outrage, but they're certainly at risk of alienating this fan base.
It's amazing, Kaz, because I remember I must have been 19 off season after the Knicks missed out on KD and Kyrie. And I think we did with you the 7 stages of grief as a Knicks fan. And it was fantastic. You were on the couch, you were going through it. And so I'm just wondering, now the Knicks are in a position where it looks like they can contend for a couple of years here. Do you have empathy for the Mavs fan? Do you look down at the Mavs fan? Do you laugh at the Mavs fan?
What? No, hell no. I vividly remember that tank game where they still had the pick from the Porzingis trade, and the Dallas Mavericks had zero incentive to win that game, and they didn't. And to this day, outside of Joel Embiid pulling on Mitchell Robinson's leg last year in the first round of the playoffs, it was one of the most horrifying things I've seen a franchise just openly just embrace, right? And you
hold on. Hey, former Nick Theo Pinson had a triple-double in that game.
Listen, Theo, we love Theo. We love Theo in New York. He's always good in the Garden. Legendary bench man. But that game, I'll never forgive the Dallas Mavericks for that. But now that I think about it, I saw like a Venn diagram of the Porzingis trade to Dallas, and just all of Porzingis. I obviously don't have it in front of me, but like getting Randall, which ends up getting the pick to get quickly, to get the picks to end up getting OG, like, and all in all, Knicks fans should thank Dallas for what they've done for our franchise. Like,
Well,
they've gotten us a franchise point guard. The bad basketball juju from tanking a game has, obviously led to some pretty terrible repercussions for that franchise. And not for nothing, I'm a Luka fan. Like, you can say what you want about certain franchises. There's certain players throughout the NBA that if you like basketball, you like watching play. And Luka Doncic is one of those guys. I don't care if that dude was chugging 40 beers pre-game and smoking hookah on the sideline. I do not care. If you are giving me 35, 10, and 10, and you just went to the NBA Finals, I do not care what you do with your free time. As long as what you're doing is within the legal limits of these United States, it's a free country. Do what you got to do. Now what you've done is you put that battery in Luka's back. You sent him to LA. You've told the entire world you're fat, you're out of shape, you have terrible conditioning. And now an already extremely talented player is going with a super motivated legend and the person who is probably tailor-made to get you to get all those bad habits that people have said about you out of you. And I don't know if you watched the Lakers the last couple of games. Luka is looking like Luka again, and the Lakers have been good. They've been surprisingly good defensively. LeBron is putting up MVP numbers, and they've kind of done it with Luka just playing average basketball.
Yep.
Last couple of games, he's starting to look like that dude who is a top 3, top 1 player in the world whenever he wants to be. And that's all thanks to the Dallas Mavericks and the way they've handled their franchise over the past several years. It's unbelievable. And as a longtime Knicks fan who's been around some questionable decisions from franchises, I can happily say, couldn't be me. Could not be me.
Oh, it's been you. It's funny, though. The KP trade, who got killed for that trade at the time it happened?
The New York Knicks.
I mean, it was like widely celebrated in Dallas. And guys, I got to push back on you on the tanking karma thing with the Mavericks because that tank job got them Derek Lively II, who, as a rookie, played a huge role in their run to the finals and was the perfect long-term partner, pick-and-roll partner for Luka Doncic, which there's a long list of reasons why that trade was so stunning. And by the way, probably time for the Mavericks to pull another tank job. Kyrie, unfortunately, out for the season.
Yep.
No need for AD to come back. No need for Lively to come back. Both those guys they were hoping to get for the last 2 or 3 weeks of the season. Mavericks need to just, try to get in that Cooper Flag Derby as much as possible. They're not going to have good odds, but they're going to have some odds. And settle into the couch because Luka and the Lakers got a chance to go on a deep playoff run. Luka, the defense wins championship thing, which was Nico's initial quote to me minutes after the trade. I get it. I will also remind you, with Luka Doncic as the face of that franchise, the final quarter of last season, after they made these moves to surround him with athleticism, they were the number 1 defense in the NBA. They played damn good defense on their way to the finals last year. Luka has obvious defensive deficiencies. When he's locked in, when he's buying in, when he's engaged, he can be part of a good defensive scheme. He can be a really active and productive help defender because he's big, because he has great hands, because obviously the guy's a basketball genius, anticipation. He can get a lot of steals. He actually, despite having a vertical leap that's can be measured like with your finger and thumb, he'll get some block shots just because again it's anticipation, and then he will, when he's locked in, he can compete on ball, and you got to help him, you got to protect him, got to protect the out of him. JJ Redick and the Lakers are doing that. They're packing the paint. They've been the number 1 defense in the league since mid-January. Obviously predating the trade, and there's some luck involved there. Opponent 3-point shooting's been bad. Is it luck, or are they kind of daring the right people to take threes? It's a combination thereof. It's also you're going to have fewer people to dare come playoff time. But Kaz, to your point, the Lakers have been rolling, and last night was, I would say, the 3rd time that Luka's had kind of a typical Luka performance from a scoring perspective, from a scoring and efficiency perspective in a Lakers uniform. The dude's going to average 30 plus efficiently.
Yeah.
You know, and they're a threat. They've, despite not having a real big and not being able to make the trade or decide not to make the trade for Mark Williams, you have to consider the Lakers a legitimate threat at this point.
In addition to the Luka defensive talk, he's a great rebounder for his size also. And I don't think he gets enough credit for, those defensive rebounds are possession stoppers. No matter what you say about his foot speed laterally, like when you can get a rebound and end the possession, that helps your defense. That helps LeBron get down on the break and get those easy, transition buckets. That gets those guys that aren't as offensively talented as LeBron and Luka those easy buckets as well as the Hachimuras, the Reeves, all that type of stuff. So, Nico said defense wins championships, but funny enough, it looks like the Lakers defense might be the what possibly gets them in championship talks this year because they're second in the West and they look pretty good.
Mm-hmm. It's going to be interesting to see tomorrow night. OG Anunoby, Mikal Bridges matching up LeBron and Luka. We're going to circle back to the Knicks, but Tim MacMahon, author of The Wonder Boy, fantastic book on Luka Doncic. Pre-order it now. It's coming out later this month. Tim, one last question for you on Mavericks related is I was told that, even after Kevin Durant kind of signaled, that he wanted to stay with the Warriors, I had heard that Dallas was still kind of behind the scenes trying to figure out, hey, how do we make this work? How do we get Kevin Durant here? Now, I just assumed all along that their interest would remain in the offseason when the Suns circle back to Durant trades. Do you think the Kyrie injury impacts those plans at all? How do you see Dallas's pursuit of Kevin?
Yeah, and it's funny. I've been told by people up high in the Mavs front office, no, we're not a KD team. And Ian, there's times where you're told stuff and you're like, I don't believe you. And I would definitely put that in that category. Look, the Kyrie thing is a devastating blow because it obviously just kills any hopes this season and significantly impacts next season. But by Nico Harrison's own words, when they made this trade, they put themselves in position to have a 3 to 4 year time frame. You've got to do everything the only way you can possibly justify this trade is to win a title in those 3 to 4 years. So you've got to do everything possible. It would take a lot to get Kevin Durant. There's going to be interest from multiple teams. The Mavericks would probably have to give up 3 rotation players, some draft capital. I certainly would not rule out the possibility, no matter what I'm told at this point.
Interesting stuff. Now, I got one last one because our buddy Lee Escobedo, friend of the show, he wanted me to ask you this. Is it true that no players with Dallas really knew about this thing until it happened? Was it as much of a secret as it's been portrayed? Because he wants to know, Jason Kidd, Finley, Kyrie, nobody knew about it. And I just want to pick your brain on that quickly.
Jason Kidd says he didn't know until the 11th hour. I can't confirm or deny that. I can tell you that Jason Kidd had similar frustrations with Luka well before this trade was made. But as far as the players, Kyrie found out about this when he was getting treatment. It was just after midnight in the Cleveland Ritz-Carlton. He was getting treatment. He's got his own body staff. He was getting treatment from his guys. Saw this thing come across social media, and that's how he found out about it. Now, listen, Kyrie obviously has been empathetic toward Luka. Their relationship remains strong, but he was the one person, the one major figure in the organization who I felt like was on point with his messaging coming out of the trade. And that's kind of grieving the process of losing Luka, but turning the page and embracing the opportunity to play with Anthony Davis, and having a chance to contend with the new core that they had. Unfortunately for Kyrie and unfortunately for the Mavericks, he got 2.5 quarters on the court with Anthony Davis, and we don't know when we'll see those two together again.
Yeah, it's a lot of elements still to be determined here. A lot of moving parts, but so fascinating. Again, Tim covering it all in The Wonder Boy. His new book on Luka Doncic comes out later this month. Be sure to pre-order it now wherever you get your books. Now we are going to the What We Learned segment. What We Learned is presented by Binghamton University. Binghamton University was named the top school in the SUNY system according to recent rankings from the Wall Street Journal and Forbes. Visit binghamton.edu for more. And just a quick note there, Binghamton, one of the many prestigious universities that Tim MacMahon could not have gotten into coming out of high school.
Hey, I went to college for 8 years, so I'm probably twice as smart as you.
What we learned, we're going to get into the end of the roster here with the Knicks. They waived Matt Ryan. They waived Jacob Toppin. And they brought in 2 players on two-way deals, Marjan Beauchamp, and then they also got, Anton from Boston, last name escaping me right now.
Anton Matthews, I want to say?
No, Anton Watson.
Hey, I want to hear your scouting report on the guy. You can't remember his last name.
Anton Watson. For some reason, Smith was stuck in my head. I knew it wasn't Smith.
Anton Smith. He helped me win some fantasy football games back in the day when he was toting the rock for the Bills.
Yeah, well, my apologies to Mr. Watson. But what they did was they claimed Watson off waivers, and that allows them to have him available for the rest of the regular season. Most players who sign two-way deals at this point can only play 12 games of the rest of the regular season, but they'll have him for the remainder. They still have that 15th roster spot open, right? And we talked about Moses Brown, who's now in the G League with the Knicks. I just think if they were going to do that, they would have done it already. And so I've talked about it. I do think, my opinion, PJ Tucker, you talk about basketball, whatever he has left, sure, that's fair to debate. I think he would be a good presence in this Knick locker room. Yes, of course, there's veterans in the locker room, but I just think, being around them this year, being around the league for a little bit, I think they could use a voice in there that commands everyone's respect and attention. And PJ Tucker, 13-year vet, NBA champ, certainly it is that. So it's going to be interesting to see how things play out here with that 15th man spot. I'm also looking later this week, Mitchell Robinson. I don't think he can play back-to-backs yet, so maybe something has to happen by that point. And guys, there is one more Knick Mav topic that we didn't get into before I wanted to hit on here because our buddy Zach Blatter, he put together an interesting fact about the Knicks and the Mavs. Mavs ranking number 1 in games missed, and the Knicks ranking number 30 in games missed according to Basketball Index. Now, the one element here is Knicks getting Casey Smith in the offseason. And Tim, I'm just curious, you think that plays a role here in that stat that I just rattled off from Zach?
When the Mavericks fired Casey Smith, and it was a firing, it was portrayed as a reassignment because he had a year left on his contract. That they basically sent him home to collect checks last season. When they made that decision, it was shocking. This is one of the most respected, maybe the most respected person in his field, and was just a huge part of the fabric of the franchise as well. You're talking about a guy who was in Dallas for 2 decades, who was the right-hand man for multiple head coaches, including Jason Kidd, who had great relationships with players, including Luka Doncic. And I mentioned this stuff in the book because part of what happened with Luka, in addition to Casey being great at his job, like, yes, nobody in that role can guarantee that you're going to have great health, but he's going to maximize your odds. He certainly has done that with the Knicks, and I do believe that he has been sorely missed in Dallas. But players love this guy. He is one of Dirk Nowitzki's best friends. He had a great relationship with Luka Doncic. He was a huge part of the group that helped Luka make this massive cultural transition from Europe as a teenager to not just to America, but to the NBA. And, Luka grumbled to people this year. They fire everybody that I like, or they get rid of everybody that I like. It was Casey Smith. Scott Tomlin, their longtime PR man, followed soon after that. It was his decision to go be Dirk's executive director of his foundation, but it was related to the Casey Smith departure. They fired their strength coach, Jeremy Holsopple, massage therapist, Casey Spangler this summer. These are all people that were part of Luka's inner circle. And what ends up happening is that really frayed the relationship between Luka and Nico Harrison. And I think all this stuff is part of what, and I'll cover this in the book, is part of what led up to this shocking decision to trade a generational superstar in his prime. But it's not just about Casey being a nice guy. You just laid the facts out. He's been a great hire for the New York Knicks, because if you have Casey Smith leading your medical and performance group, you're going to have one of the best medical and performance groups in the NBA. And by the way, he chose the Knicks over other suitors. Like, he had his options this summer for sure.
Yeah. The Knicks had to be aggressive there in getting Casey out of Dallas. Another just wrinkle to this Knicks. Man,
and that's got to be a big thumb in the nose to the big old Tibbs plays people too hard and plays too many minutes, and they play a ton of minutes and they're going to wear down. I'm like, the flip side of that is like, hey, they seem pretty healthy to me. All right, like, they played a ton of minutes. Nobody's really gotten hurt yet, and the numbers don't lie. The number 30th in players not missing games. So I mean, those are one of those hires that doesn't really, I guess, make a lot of waves as far as like talking points on NBA shows. But I mean, that's one of those things that's really helped the Knicks this year so far. They're 40-21 in the season. And, Mitch has looked good coming back and being healthy. So if Tibbs wants to run those guys 40 minutes a game, at least they got the best equipped dude to do it in the as far as being the VP of sports medicine.
You might want to knock on some wood. And by the way,
I'm not going to couple. I
mentioned stars that Casey has had a great relationship with. Obviously, Jalen Brunson is on that list.
Yeah.
And it's not a coincidence that he went to Jalen Brunson's New York Knicks.
Right. Certainly that had to be a factor there for sure. Thank you, Tim. We're going to head to our segment called the Talkback now, where we answer some of the listeners, watchers, viewers, I guess you'd call them. And we bring in my friend, your friend, the big spend, Matt Spendley, and he's going to guide the ship here with the fan questions. Matt, what do you got?
I think you're on mute, bro.
He's got a mute button is what he's got.
There you go.
We got Matt. I think
the voice of the fans has laryngitis.
I saw Matt. He looks great. I couldn't hear him. So I'm going to ask Kaz a fan question. I don't know who it was from. My apologies there. But Josh Hart did not play well last night against Golden State. Look, he's been an engine for this team for most of the year. Do you have a concern about Hart based on last night, or what are your thoughts on where he is right now?
I mean, a little bit, because it's starting to become a little bit of a trend, right? Like, he's the engine of this team. And against these, highly ranked teams around the NBA, not just the Warriors, but obviously the Thunder, the Celtics, the Cavaliers, Josh Hart hasn't played particularly well against those teams either. And I said it earlier in the show. I said a lot of those teams are big, and there's certain times where Josh Hart's heart, for lack of a better term, has overcome a lot of, the height disadvantages that he may have. And I've said it on Twitter many times. I think I call him the Carmelo Anthony of Draymond Greens, right? Like, he's the dude who just kind of does everything, and just is the ultimate glue guy. And any team that is already good, he makes them better. That being said, I think he still has to sort of find his way when Mitch sort of ingratiates himself back into this lineup and this rotation. And, there's been a lot of teams sort of daring him to shoot lately. And a lot of those times where Josh Hart has had those big games is when those teams have dared him to shoot and he's made him pay for it. There's more than a handful of times, not just against this Warriors team, but against many other games in the past several weeks where he's just dribbling in front of people who are giving him 4 or 5 foot of space to shoot the ball. And if he doesn't catch it in rhythm and let it go, it messes up the entire offensive rhythm. And he's just sort of looking around trying to get the ball to Jalen or getting the ball to somebody who could help sort of create. I'll never be worried about his rebounding ability. I'll never be worried about his ability to play make and especially work on the fast break. I personally believe if Mitchell Robinson does find himself in a starting lineup against these bigger teams, that Josh Hart would probably be best suited coming off the bench and being that guy who could start sort of be the engine for the reserves for the New York Knicks. That's been another sort of Achilles heel for this team. Even though I love Deuce McBride and the fan favorite he's become, Cameron Payne's had some really good games. Landry Shamet has starting to really come on as far as a long range shooter. I think Josh Hart coming off that bench gives them a more of a bigger punch. And, if he's doing this against starters, I'd love to see him do this against reserves and not just keep the Knicks above water, but I think it gives the Knicks an advantage having a guy like that you could bring off the bench that can score, that can defend, that can rebound, that can push the break, get open shots for those shooters like Payne, like McBride, and like Shamet. So I'm not terribly worried about him, but, the games against these higher competition teams, it does sort of start to concern you when they're letting him shoot and he's not taking advantage of it.
Yeah, another decision for Tom Thibodeau to make down the stretch of games over the course of the next few weeks here. I think we have Matt Spenley back. Matt, are you with us?
You guys got me now?
All
Can
right.
you hear me? Sorry, guys. My mic died in the middle of the show. So I will say my two Josh Hart points I was going to make when I asked Kaz the question. 1, 3 of his 6 single-digit scoring games have come over the last 18 games in which he's shooting 17% from 3. So obviously we know he's not a great three-point shooter, but that's been to change. Tim, on the Hart point, I want to talk a little bit just about something we've talked about the entire year, and I know you've talked about too on your podcast, is just the Knicks' struggle against the top teams, and Hart and Brunson being open and honest about that on the most recent Roommates show, talking about that right to the fans. So I want to know, number 1, how you feel about the Knicks' struggles against specifically Cleveland, Boston, OKC, and then number 2, just your feeling on those guys kind of going directly to the fans to talk about that and be earnest about that.
Well, Perk doesn't want players to do podcasts, and neither do I, because I think they should leave the Hoop Collective all the audience. No, listen, I honestly, it's funny that because Brunson has always been very guarded with the media, but the guy's got a great personality. So to me, it's funny that he's doing a podcast and having so much fun with it. But I appreciate the honesty, and I appreciate not sugarcoating it and them really addressing the issue head on. The Knicks are a very good team that you cannot consider a contender at this point just because they've not been able to compete with the teams that have established themselves as legitimate contenders. I mean, if you're getting blown out by the best teams in the league, then obviously you're not in that class until or unless you can prove otherwise. And so that's where the Knicks are. They are a very good team that I just don't think you can take seriously as a championship threat.
I'd like to add to that. The one thing that Jalen Brunson said in that, the Roommates podcast was that I think as a Knicks fan, after seeing, not just not competing against the top teams, but getting blown out, is he said, we have everything we need in this locker room, right? Like, and if you're a Knicks fan, if you're somebody who's seen this team, pretty much have their way with the rest of the league, except for these 3 teams. That's what you want to hear. You want to hear, especially if you're, a franchise player, your captains, the heart and soul of your team are doing podcasts, and, it's almost like a state of the union to your fan base. Mm-hmm. Like, they want to hear a reason why they should still believe that if they run up against the Cavaliers or if they run up against the Celtics in the Eastern Conference playoffs, that they have a chance. And, what they have shown in this season so far is that they just do not. They've shown flashes. They've shown abilities. We've seen, quarters where they've looked like they can hang with the Celtics. They've seen quarters where they look like they can hang with the Cavaliers. They have been able to put it together for 4 quarters so far. And Jalen Brunson straight up, owning it and saying how frustrating it is and not trying to make it seem like, what a lot of players seem to do, where it's not a story. Like, they've embraced it. They talk about it. They know that it is a thing. So, him saying, like, we have everything we need to beat these guys in our locker room right now, definitely, calls off the dogs, probably turns off the alarm signals as a Knicks fan. But then you got to go out there and do it. They still got 2 more chances to go out there and at least prove that they can hang with these guys before the regular season. And then who knows? Lots of crazy things happen on the way to the playoffs. Lots of crazy things happen in the midst of the playoffs. So I don't want to, bank on, well, maybe they might have to play the Cavaliers or the Celtics. No, you want to at least show that you can beat these guys before anything. And, I think with, the Roommates podcast, which I love listening to, and I think it's great. And I think they should still continue to do it, contrary to what Kendrick Perkins says.
Yeah, I agree.
It's definitely what has ingratiated this particular ideation of the Knicks to this fan base, because they've been so earnest and they've been so likable, and they haven't run from any smoke, man. They've absolutely taken it on the chin, and that's what you want from your team: accountability.
I will say, when they had Cuban on there, Brunson went soft. They didn't get into the smoke. They danced around the smoke on that.
He was being a pro. He was being a pro, man. At that time, it all worked out for everybody at that time. So
hey, there's a chapter in the book that delves into that whole thing, and trust me, it wasn't all warm and fuzzy between the Brunson family and Cuban.
I don't think so. But hey, once again, thank you, Dallas. Appreciate you.
Excellent tease, Tim. Excellent tease. All right, Ian, back to you.
Yeah, I think we covered it all, fellas. You guys were great. Really appreciate your time. The only thing I wanted to hit on, Tim, you mentioned the ratio before, production versus pain in the ass factor. And is it true that originated by ESPN bosses with you? I think that's where it started, right?
No, they told me you were on the wrong end. That's why they booted your butt out of there. You know when it actually originated? When I was covering the Cowboys. And I don't remember if it was T.O. or Des Bryant, but it was definitely one of those receivers.
That's tremendous. Tremendous. Well, look, go get Tim MacMahon's new book, The Wonder Boy. It's going to be out later this month. You could pre-order it. He's covered the Luka situation like a glove, and he's got a chapter on the Lakers trade and everything that went into it. So it's a fantastic read. Go check that out, and keep an eye on Kaz Famuyide on 7 p.m. in Brooklyn and Fanatics, and he's all over wrestling and social media, so you know where to find him. But thank you very much, fellas. That is going to do it for us. We will be back next week. I think it's March 11th with another episode of the Putback. Thanks for being here. We hope to see you then.